So hi everyone, and welcome to the very first Leaders of Today podcast with your host, me, Billy Humphreys, hosted from MRL Consulting Group. Now, the Leaders of Today podcast is all about championing leaders in the sectors that we love. And I'm delighted to have today's guest on. Now, with every podcast, we want every guest to introduce himself. So over to you, Chris.
Hello, Billy. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So Chris, a bit of introduction about who you are.
Certainly. So I'm Chris Jacobs. I am the Vice President of Autonomous Transportation and Automotive Safety at Analog Devices, which is a semiconductor headquartered in Wilmington, Massachusetts in the United States. I've worked there for 25 years. I've had a variety of roles, but most recently I have had this role here where my mission is to make autonomous transportation a reality for our planet.
Great. So like I said, this podcast is all about championing you, talking about the businesses you work with and kind of how you operate. But first,
Sure.
let's go back to the very beginning. So the year's 1995. So Bill Clinton was president, the 49ers won the Super Bowl, Forrest Gump was Film of the Year, and Microsoft had just released Windows 95. And you, sir, had joined ADI. So let's start with that. So why ADI? What made you kind of choose a career to work with Analog Devices?
That is an interesting story, Billy. Prior to that, I actually worked at Texas Instruments for 3 years in Houston, Texas.
Oh, great.
I worked in the memory products division there. Right at that time, Texas Instruments was considering exiting the DRAM market. And so I read a little bit of the tea leaves. Also, my wife and I were originally from the northeast part of the United States. We both went to school in upstate New York. And so we thought that perhaps that was the time to consider a move. So I actually applied to Analog Devices out of the newspaper.
No way. No internet.
How many people do that today? So, proper cover letter and using the United States mail in order to submit my resume. But I was fortunate enough to get a call back. Came up there, and it was a unique opportunity, Billy. In Texas Instruments, I was a CAD engineer. My responsibility was to develop design flows to implement DRAM chips. And there was a lot of complexity associated with developing these chips back in the early 90s, just from a design automation perspective. Sure. So that was what originally attracted me to Analog Devices, and I think that's why ADI had such a strong interest in me. Analog Devices, just by its definition, grew up as an analog design company. But they wanted to make the transition to more mixed signal, highly integrated products, bringing more digital functionality onto the chips. As you well know, when you start implementing that level of capability, a new tool chain needs to be introduced. It becomes less full custom, more digital synthesis, very tool heavy. They had no CAD infrastructure whatsoever. So part of my role was to come in and work with a variety of teams to bring up these mixed signal and digital flows. So it was really a great confluence of my skills of what I learned at Texas Instruments and a clear need at ADI. And I very quickly in 1995, over the next 3 years, I very much built out the team as well as the capability. And today I'm very happy to see, the types of products that ADI are developing is far different than what it was 25 years ago, just in terms of the capability. So, but that's how I originally came in and was able to add value.
So I guess with that, was it a big leap going from being just the engineer at TI to then going to be a CAD manager? Was that a big leap, or?
Well, I kind of backed into that, Billy. Like most things, I came in and I was an individual contributor at the time when I came into ADI, but it was a great opportunity, right? There was just this thirst for developing these various automation flows in ADI, and I very quickly was able to put together a strategy, and it was just natural that we started to build the team because it just happened that way. I actually. In 1998, 1999, I actually moved away from being the team lead of the digital CAD organization and went back to being an individual contributor as a design engineer. I really felt that if I looked at Analog Devices, the culture of ADI is very technical. You have to prove your salt technically. And so, yes, I was putting together design flows and working across the group. That was a great opportunity because it allowed me to interact with everybody in the company. Everybody needed to have, this capability, and they came from more traditional full custom routes. And so I found a very good impedance match, so to speak,
Yeah.
with the rest of the company. And that allowed me to, in my next step, to choose the right area in which I really wanted to go much deeper technically. And the next step I took was to become a design engineer in our high-speed converter group. And you may know that ADI is a very strong data converter
Yeah,
position.
absolutely. Yeah.
And so I really wanted to be part of that franchise, right? So I really made that explicit leap. I thought that I had a couple different options of where I could have gone after doing CAD. Ultimately, I said to myself, well, ADI is not necessarily a CAD company. It's a design company. So I really want to get over into that design area. And well, what area would be best for me? Well, I want to be engaged in a franchise, and the converter franchise was a key area. And again, me being a digital guy, them being more analog in that group, again, I was able to walk in and really get a large design remit during that time, and it blossomed from there.
So do you find that it's all about your mindset? So you went from obviously doing CAD to then doing design. Did you feel like you knew that you wanted to make leaps and you wanted to go forward? You kind of had to throw yourself into that and do that.
Definitely, Billy. It's interesting. A couple things that I've learned, and I think that you've hit the nail on the head, Billy. That one, I had to actively manage my career. I have to take ownership of where I want to go, right? So there's I like to make things happen. I don't want things to happen to me. So that was kind of an underpinning of what we're doing, my whole philosophy of this. Also, I thought a lot about this in leading up to our call here. If you see a need, you need to address that need. And so,
Yeah.
I actively went in. I was like, if I looked at high-speed converters and the struggles that they were having to bring more capability to these data converters, like filtering and different types of control logic and things that were far above just the simple data converter that was there now, I linked that to my desires. So I saw that need and I went into that. And to this day, I still do that. I really actively approach opportunities that I think that I could add value to this. And so I'm very proactive. I don't get asked necessarily to do something. I want to be the one that identifies the problem, comes up with a solution, and then offer my services in order to address that. So maybe it's best summed up, but I would rather ask for forgiveness than ask for permission.
Yeah.
So, I've had supervisors, one supervisor at the start of my career that said to me that Chris sometimes takes authority when it is not given to him. He is no longer with analog devices because I was very aggressive. Not necessarily to move up through the ranks, but I just felt that I really wanted to continue to add value in whatever space that I was able to add value in. And 25 years later, I have a very strong relationship with all levels of the management. I'm very well known. I get called upon to work on things outside of my business unit, and I think it's largely based on this philosophy that I'm here to add value in whatever needs to be done. I'm a company man when it comes to that.
Just touching on that, I think it's like you said, it's just going from, you mentioned when you were doing the CAD stuff, you saw that wasn't the route. You actually wanted to do something else, and you wanted to kind of penetrate the different areas of the business. And
Correct.
maybe because you've done that, that's why you're in the position you are today. Would you say that obviously you were a design manager for about 9 years? How did you find because you mentioned about you manage teams kind of globally across different locations? That's always a challenge, multiple people we speak to on a daily basis. It's how do you find that remote management style, especially
Sure.
today, even like today's climate? How do you address that?
So it's I grew up with that, Billy, right? So when you ask me, how do you manage it? I've never managed really anything different. I mean, the CAD group, sure, maybe it was 5 or 6 individuals that would be immediately outside of my office that we would be able to manage, but very quickly, as I moved into more design functions, we immediately started to work with design colleagues around the planet. So In 1998, thereabouts, we started to do more work in China. We eventually acquired, I was part of the team that acquired what is now known as our China Development Center. It's over 200 engineers. When I originally was part of the team acquired, it was only 5 or 6 guys that was doing digital design at the time. And so again, 25 years later, much different contribution, but that's how I learned in those areas. So it was just native as I came into this. I would have to say that it was not without challenge. I mean, something like this is that, very simple things that, you have to ping pong evening and morning calls sometimes.
Yeah.
Just because we can't always put one team out or the other, but also it has such a unique advantage. So we got this rhythm going that we would do work in the morning, we would do work in the US time zone and then check everything in, and then in the morning in China time they would continue to work on this. And so that it took a while to get going, but once we were able to do that ping ponging like that, we were really hitting on all cylinders. 24 hours, people were working on things. Our development times shrank when it came to that. Again, not without challenge, but something in which I definitely learned through the years to really value the diversity of the inputs, just because a variety of different approaches on how to implement a design, how we could do this.
Sure.
But also the efficiencies were incredible once we get everybody on the same page, Billy.
Did you have quite a hands-on approach when hiring the teams, or the managers in those different locations?
Oh, definitely, Billy. So, as I mentioned to you before we got on our podcast here, I've always been a road warrior. I definitely feel like a face-to-face connection is very important, especially as you deal with different cultures around the world. You miss a lot when it comes to body language and understanding, and there's no replacement to after you work, let's go out for dinner or have a beer or something like that, where you kind of understand the nuances of what works and what doesn't. And so that was definitely part of my philosophy, was to always to embed with the teams, to really understand things. I was very active in the hiring, and I'm very happy to see that the people that I hired just 20 years ago now are significant leaders in China as well as in the United States. And so I was kind of part of that infrastructure. Also, as the China Design Center specifically started to mature, I actually spent 4 or 5 months over there onboarding the new director of the design centers, and so I was part of that. I also lived in Ireland for 4 or 5 months as I managed that team. A big piece of our organization, Billy, is in Ireland, and again,
of course,
it is an ADI culture, but it is a different culture, right? So, I felt it very important for me to embed with the team over there. I didn't want to simply fly over, so I spent 4 or 5 months in Ireland, really engaging very closely with the team. And something that doesn't necessarily come out clearly, I spent a lot of time in Japan too, not living there, but that was probably one of the more transformative moments working with remote teams or teams that are outside of headquarters. Our business in Japan was very much growing, Billy, and we were doing analog front ends for digital still cameras. And ultimately, we were able to get this to close to a $200 million business. We were in 70% of all cameras made in the world. And eventually that business moved on because cameras moved to more CMOS imagers. People had phones rather than standalone digital cameras.
Sure.
But if you total up the amount of time that I spent in Japan, it's 2 years of my life over there. And that taught me how to work with, obviously, a variety of different cultures, but it also gave me a customer orientation. And I see that, when I see in highly technical organizations, a lot of times teams focus on technology for the sake of technology. Through my experiences working with, across the globe, as specifically with a lot of our customers, you have to link that technology into the customer and bring that customer view into the company in order to really make sure that we're investing in the areas that are going to make the biggest impact. So, not directly related to working with remote teams, but through that engagement of working remotely with the customer, Germany, Europe, other places in Europe, China, Japan, bringing that kind of outside-in view is also probably one of the more significant transformative experiences that I had that have guided me, because I made that leap from being a design person to something that's running a business unit. And without
Sure.
that experience, I would have never been able to make that leap.
And also, you being on from the customer side, you appreciate it so much more in terms of you actually understand what that customer wants. So
Oh,
then
exactly.
it's a huge transformation.
Oh, and I could tell you that one of the times I was meeting with a customer in Japan, Billy, and we were talking about the next generation product and consumer products when it was a pretty intense thing because you had to have cameras released for the graduations in June and Christmas time in December. So it was a very frenetic pace in order to move things through. And I remember being in these meetings where we're talking about different feature sets, and I had to make some calculation to say, okay, if you want a feature, it's going to take me 2 months to develop that. How much would you pay for it? You would pay an extra dime for it? Okay, I think I could do that. And so I'm linking, what we could do from a business perspective to what I could do in order to satisfy the customer. Again, it was that nexus point that I could tell you that really gave me that really more expansive view and understanding about what I was doing here in terms of my technical contributions. And it allowed me to really expand, my view on this. And so now today, when I talk to people around the company, we want to have business savvy technologists. That's really what we want, right? We want technologists. Yes, we have to be the best when it comes to development and design engineering. You should be very deep, but you have to understand how that innovation is going to make an impact at the customer. Without that, it's just technology for technology's sake, which is worthwhile at some level. But if you can really address a problem at the customer, a problem in the market, that's really where the true transformation happens.
It's interesting you talk about that, Chris, because going at the beginning, you mentioned about how you want to be in these different departments and understand the whole product life cycle. It's really your passion of that really comes across, and to see you've been at ADI for such a long time, and I think that's testament really, because you live and I feel like you live and breathe it, and I think it's you want to see every step of that timeline along the way. So that's great to see. I guess going from the management style, we know it changes, going from 20 years ago to kind of today. Let's talk about like classic faux pas that you've made over the years. Are there any that really stand out where it could have been early on in your career or?
Yes, like most things, I think that sometimes I've overreached, in terms of what I wanted to do in the beginning. I would have to say, Billy, that and I see this in younger employees now, the way that they view their contribution could somehow be tied to the number of people that report to them, right? I need to manage a team, for me to move up into the organization, and obviously, team management is a piece of this. But over over my years at Analog Devices, I have realized that if you can actually galvanize a broader group of people that are not necessarily directly reporting to you, influence them in the direction in which you believe that we need to go, that's much more difficult, right?
Yeah,
But it's
oh
much more
sure.
powerful, right? And so, sure, we can put 10 people under an individual, and yes, that skill set will be developed, but that is not the sole prerequisite in order to move up into the organization and make a bigger impact. And so, that is probably a classic faux pas that I made. I felt that, I clearly need to have a team reporting to me. And unfortunately, that opportunity did afford itself as I built the CAD team and as I took on more design management roles. And I felt that I did have a knack for that in terms of communication. But then I realized that that was just one piece of the puzzle, not
Yeah.
necessarily the majority piece either. And so things in which I thought that was like, I'm just going to do this. This is the recipe that I'm going to follow, and I'm going to take the next level. When I moved from more of a design engineer to more of a business leader, the thing that resonated most with my new supervisor was all of the work that I mentioned previously I did in Japan, how I was able to interact with the customer and really understand those customer problems. Not necessarily the fact that I led a team of 30 or 40 individuals. That was not necessarily the most important piece. So I would say that that is one of the faux pas. I would say another one is Analog Devices is we have been called and sometimes arrogant devices because we believe We believe that our technology is the absolute best, and
So you
therefore,
should, absolutely.
and we should, right?
Yeah,
Yes, but it's linked to what you and I just talked about. We have to make sure that that technology is really addressing the problem in the marketplace. And I'm sure that you probably heard stories that if you look at signal chains, everybody kind of gets a little block on the signal chain, and then they're looking at this block and they're like, boy, I'm gonna get this this dynamic range to 6 dB better than everything else. But then the blocks before and after, they can't take that performance, right? They are the performance limiters. Yet this individual will focus so much on this internal block, but at the end of the day, it's not making the impact in the final product. And so, that was also, something in which I've done in the past. I'm going to do this. This is going to be the best thing ever. And then I get in front of the customer and they're like, that's not what I wanted. I wanted something
yeah,
different. And you miss this, from that standpoint. So being a listener, not a transmitter, but I would have to say that probably the biggest thing that I've learned over the years is to be a receiver. Listen to what's happening, right? Because I could tell you that I have been through a variety of business challenges, and we've won business and we've lost business. And I look back at when we've lost things, we saw the writing on the wall. The customer did tell us this at the time, but at the time we weren't listening closely enough, or we said, that's not the very important thing. We're going to build this and it'll work just fine, on this. And so that was a maybe not early in my career, but it is something that you kind of have to learn through the school of hard knocks as
yeah,
students.
absolutely, yeah.
And those were probably a couple examples in which I've
So
learned.
would you say your management style's changed, or is it kind of stayed quite similar, but just kind of tweaks from the cultural changes where you've gone to Japan, or is that made a big difference, or over in Ireland?
Yeah, I would have to say that my philosophy is largely the same. It's how I apply it that is different. I feel like I have the best way I can describe it is maybe the a service style of management in which I feel like it is my job to make others in the organization shine, to be more capable in what they're doing. Give them the responsibility and then get out of their way and then hold them account.
Yeah,
So I've never felt that I needed to be the guy that had to speak first and speak most loudly. I would rather have someone on my staff take that lead and support them through this. And so that was also something that probably evolved over the last 25 years. Obviously, as a young person, I want to be the one that is seen as being the
yeah.
one, the tip of
Because
the
you want to
arrow.
do you want to have all the reins. Yeah,
I want to have the reins. I want to be given the credit. And then the more I realized it's not all about me. It's about how I can enable others in the organization. And if I could get 5, 6, 7 of the leaders in my staff to really, take on that next step, to be my peer, not necessarily my report. And as I mentioned, when I looked at when we made these key hires in China or other geographies, these individuals are now significant leaders, and I consider that one of my accomplishments, that I was able to support them in taking on that next step. So I would have to say that building teams, enabling leadership, that is something in which is probably part and parcel of my leadership style. And then obviously over the years, I've learned to work with different cultures and in different organizations. Working in Germany now is certainly a different experience than working in the Far East, right? As you probably well know, just in
sure.
terms of how our customers convey information, the body language, and all of that. And that is definitely something in which had to be learned, but I was able to applicate my style to that. And it's also, Billy, I learned that just my Americanism is an important piece of this. I could tell you, working in Japan, I would work with my colleagues, and they would say to me, "Chris, you have to say this. We can't say this. You
Yeah,
can say this, right?"
yeah,
And
yeah.
so again, just working, with managing situations and understanding how I could approach a problem. It became much more sophisticated, Billy, over the last 25 years, as you can see, just the nuances of how I felt that I could manage people's situation, business opportunities, definitely. But again, underpinning by that philosophy of, how can I help? How can I enable the broader organization to be successful?
Have you seen many changes with, I kind of guess, the next level of management coming through? So kind of the next, like say, call it the millennials coming through. Is their leadership style different to say kind of your kind of generation or?
Certainly. I mean, there's always nuances. I honestly, I know that there's been so many articles written about millennials and the management style and all of that, and frankly, I don't think there's that much different. I mean, people are people when it comes to the end of the day, and so style can be taught. But the substance is largely the same. So I see engineers coming in today, and they're still motivated by the very same things that I was. They want to make a contribution. I would have to say that is probably they're more well informed in terms of how the technology that they're developing will make that societal impact.
Yeah,
Perhaps when I joined the company back in 1995, I was not necessarily overly concerned about how my technology is going to make a positive impact on society. That's probably a big difference that I see.
yeah,
Millennials want to see, like, okay, how am I going to change the world? How is this going to reduce carbon emissions? How is this going to, make cell phone communications available to, another billion people in the world? Those are front of mind. Now, how they manage the teams, how they engage with the teams, again, probably a little bit more flexible than I was. I was in the office. I was doing the things more traditional. Maybe that was a little bit more flexibility working from home. I mean, in the COVID-19 situation, I could tell you that my team is actually moving forward very aggressively on this. They brought equipment home.
oh
It's
great,
so much more flexible than I would have to say that, if this happened in 1995 or when I was doing this work, that I don't know if I would have had the same level of flexibility when it comes to this. But still, I see that people are still motivated by doing the best work possible. They're working so hard, just as hard now as as the older employees work. And so there's really, it is a great esprit de corps. There's no, especially in analog devices, I really feel that regardless of how long you've been in the industry, there is a high value to diversity in our groups in terms of approach on things. And so we very much engage the variety of different individuals in the group, age groups, and different focus and whatnot. And so I think that is kind of really minimize the differences
yeah.
between the different different people, and we celebrate those. And I do think that is something that ADI has learned over the last 25 years as well, as the population continues to change.
And like you say, it's a huge, like you touch on that. I guess it's culture, isn't it? It's how that is brought together. Culture is now such a huge part. And I guess from millennials, that's so much more important. Like back in 1995, people weren't asking those questions in interviews. Now it's, what is the company culture? How can I succeed in this, and what is the growth plan for the company? We've noticed that massively with people coming in, and it's the top thing on their list versus what hours am I working? It's
Yeah,
how
exactly.
can I make a difference?
Yes, exactly. Or, tell me about your cafeteria, things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah. So, and I think that is definitely the way that we should be, we should be hiring people. We want people that can take a broader view, right? Look beyond the horizon about what's coming next and how they can guide the company into the future. So, yeah, that is definitely the people that we want part of our company.
So how would you say who's your biggest inspiration at Analog then? Obviously you've been here 25 years. Do you have a mentor there, or
Oh,
is there a
25
list
years,
of
Billy.
people, or
Yeah, a list of people. I would have to say that there were a variety of individuals that have really been transformative to me. And I gave this a lot of thought, Billy, as I was, as I was preparing for our discussion today. And I could count them on one hand that have really, given me the guidance necessary. I would have to say that when I was, part of the initial phases of me coming into analog devices, I had a supervisor, Reddy Penamali. He eventually became the country manager of India for ADI, and he has since retired. But he is the one that really inspired me to work across the organization in my new role as a CAD engineer, right? So, reach out, go and find out what the issues are, Chris, and try to address them. So he definitely, motivated me to do that. And that was a very virtuous cycle. I was able to really understand that I can work with people that are not under my direct reporting structure. And I learned on how to put together cogent arguments about what we need to do, because I'm the digital guy now doing CAD, and I'm talking to a bunch of old crusty analog designers. And you can imagine that,
very different. Yeah.
It's Greek and Latin, right? And
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
but, through his support, I was able to be successful in that front. I would say another key individual was Dave Robertson. Dave Robertson is a fellow at Analog Devices, and has been with ADI for 30 years. And again, he was the one that he was the product line director of high-speed converters. He took me on from a design manager into a product line manager. That's when I started to take on a cross-functional role. And that was one, he took a bet on me, because I was really, focused more on design management into this. And so that was a transformative moment, because I never looked back. I became a cross-functional leader managing PLLs from that point forward. But he gave me enough rope to hang myself with. And I could tell you that as a manager, or as a parent, right, letting somebody do what they need to do and perhaps fail, and then learn from that experience, and then be able to discuss that with the person, and what happened, what could you do differently?
Yeah.
He did that several times. He would never direct me on things. He would say, well, what would you do? How would you approach this problem? And many times we would disagree on this, but he wouldn't overrule me. And that also was something that was very transformative for me. How to approach, teams, and give me enough rope, and learning from my mistakes. And my current supervisor today, Greg Henderson, is also a key mentor to me. I can tell you that, I've kind of worked on this customer orientation piece over the years, this team management, working across organizations. I find Greg to be an exceptional business person. So the art of the deal, how to, negotiate things, that's kind of where I'm on my phase of my career now, right? I've managed teams, I've managed P&Ls, I've worked with customers, but now there's a sophistication to all of those individual skills that now I'm bringing it together into the deal with the customer, right? How I could grow the business. And there's, in the past, we did not have that level of sophistication at ADI. And through over the last 25 years, we've learned a lot more on how we could contribute to the marketplace. And Greg has been so instrumental in my career to really mentoring me to really understand the sophistication of what's needed to be put into these deals. And so again, every phase of my career, I could tell you that I've had key mentors along the way. I am friends with the CEO, the SVPs, and so I talk to them every few months just to touch base. Again, 25 years, they all give me different inputs, and I can tell you that that's been very, very, very key as I've developed in my career.
And I guess it's those people who believe in you and also give you that chance to take that leap, because if you have those people who believe in you, then you are more likely to do that.
Exactly.
And like you said, have enough rope there and then they aren't they're talking to you afterwards about how would you do it differently, instead of kind of telling you what to do.
I would say, Billy, one of the things that the CEO and we talked about, that, not everything works out, okay? But you have to try. If you remain on the sidelines and you don't do anything, nothing happens, right? It's better to try and fail than not try at all. And I can tell you that is scary. That is scary, because you have to go out there, and yes, I have to try, and yes, there's a lot of ambiguity, maybe barriers in the way, but it is at those interface points that you learn about yourself, right? And that is really how leaders are made. You have to go out on that plank. You have to take that chance. And if you don't, you'll just stay still. And that is something in which I've talked to my mentors about in the past. Again, we got to move forward. We got to give this a shot, even though there's a chance of failure. And that is going to be far superior than just sitting on the sidelines and waiting for something to happen to you.
The what if?
Yes.
Isn't it? Yeah, sure. So, okay, that leads perfectly on to what I was going to ask next. I guess Do you think there are certain traits for leaders now compared to back in 1995 that have to be put in place?
Yeah, I think that you probably picked up, Billy, through the thread of this is that looking at what we're doing now in 2020 to compare to what semiconductors looked like in 1995, night and day different,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
In terms of the complexity and concepts of software and firmware and
Well, it's constantly
algorithms.
evolving, isn't it? I guess now more than ever, compared to 95, I guess the evolvement of the tech is just I guess it's weekly, it's changing.
Oh yes, definitely. And obviously semiconductors themselves, they continue to evolve, but it's the things that we try to do with those semiconductors that I think was probably the biggest transformative thing that I see. If you look at ADI back when we were started as an organization in 1965, we did discrete circuits that were put into a module, and then we eventually moved into silicon, dedicated silicon, monolithic silicon. And really the next phase is what we're doing now is we're taking that silicon and we're building other things on top of it, right? We're putting processors in there now that have algorithms, and so the makeup of our team has substantially changed. I said this in 1995, you could have one design engineer, one layout guy, one marketing guy, 10 million bucks. Great, that's a successful product, right? Today you have, a team of 200. You're making a bet on $1 billion market.
Yeah.
The development times are taking, years in order to achieve, and so again, the nature of our products has evolved so much, and hence our management style, right? We can't, this idea of managing, 3 or 4 teams, even the definition of our fellow rank, which is our highest technical rank. Back in the 90s, it was about individual contribution on a specific product. Now it's about how can we galvanize an organization to achieve a technical problem, right? So it's not necessarily, obviously, a significant technical contribution from that individual, but these problems are getting so large that a single individual can't solve everything, and we need to get a lot more pieces of the organization in order to address these problem sets. And so that's probably the biggest change, Billy. The evolution of what we're trying to do here are bringing in new skill sets, new geography, this concept that we talked about, diversity. We need to bring people that are substantially different than the typical hire was in 1995. Where in 1995 I want to hire an analog design engineer. Now we're hiring people that are motion experts or healthcare or vital signs monitoring experts here, right? People that are in the industry that can help us applicate our technology to the problem set. And again, completely different way of how teams are managed and how product developments are executed upon. And so I would have to say that that's been the most significant shift.
So why, okay, but I'll just say it, why analog devices for such a long time? What did they do so right to keep you for 25 years?
Yeah, I would have to say when I worked at a larger organization like Texas Instruments, and it was specifically in the memory group, as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of compartmentalization in terms of your contribution, right? So, there would be things in which, you think of it as an assembly line, right? There are people before you that are doing work, and then there were somewhat strict bounds to the contribution, right? You start here, and then you complete the work here, and then somebody else carries it the rest of the way. Analog devices was completely different than that, right? There was a lot more freedom to how to contribute on this. And so that, to myself, was very powerful because I felt that there were no walls. Scary, definitely scary, but I felt that the more that I was engaged, the more comfortable that I was. And it goes back to kind of the first parts of what you and I were discussing. I'm encouraged, even now in my career, go out and find the problem to solve, Chris, right? We're not going to put you in a box when it comes to this. And so I felt that my contributions were directly impacting the operations around what we were doing. I was given that remit one of the key things that I did is that, as you can imagine, Analog Devices has a big advanced development organization. We have to do this advanced development before we can commit to product development. Very unstructured, right? We just have maybe a lot of bright guys contributing things, and a lot of times that took a long time. I started a project, and over 2 or 3 years, we put more structure to that. That wasn't part of my job. I was currently I was the product line manager in the high-speed converter group, right? And so I'm meant to be getting converter design-ins and wireless infrastructure and all of that. But I realized that this was a key problem, and so I just jumped into that, right?
You had the freedom to do that.
The freedom to do it, right? You're like, yeah, that's a great idea, Chris. Let's go and do that. I never felt that way when I worked at TI. It could have existed there. Maybe I was too junior, but definitely ADI nurtured that that approach, right? And so it's not for everyone. It's organization 2.0 when it comes to this stuff, but it's definitely something that has kept me around the organization.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about a bit of the tech then. Obviously, that's your core focus. So looking at autonomous, looking at, I guess, specifically with like LiDAR. Again, this is a very broad question, but what do you actually think the future looks like? Obviously, we see it everywhere. We know when it is fully autonomous, but once we get to that, what's next? Is it just the evolution of the sensor? Is that what's going to keep changing?
Yeah, so I think, so Billy, I think that in a similar arc that we just talked about, how products, not only at ADI, but if you look at most semiconductor companies, how they've evolved over the last 25 years. I think that you see a similar arc, of autonomous driving, right? So, these systems are going to get much more sophisticated. And certainly, if you just look at the amount of electronic content that's going to be in these cars, it's going up dramatically. Cars 25 years ago were largely mechanical. Now they're largely, an electronics, engine on this whole thing. And that's going to continue to increase, right? So, like most things, I think that there will be evolutions of that technology. If you look at autonomous driving specifically, Billy, I think today there's challenges in the sensors, right? So, and I think that this is where ADI is going to add a lot of value. Sensors need to be able to accurately detect motion of the automobile or perceive the world around it through various perception technologies like radar, LiDAR, or vision. Each of those technologies are at various levels of maturity and capability. But none of them, I would argue, are at a level to support fully autonomous driving today. They could do driver assistance, even the blind spot systems that are in your car today. Many people turn them off because there's false positives, right? So, that needs to evolve, right? And so I think that, to your point, I think that there is a lot of hardware focus, I think, in the near term here to really, make sure that the performance of these various sensors reach the requisite level, but also do it in a cost envelope that makes sense. So you'll see sensing technologies be putting on robo-taxis, and you'll see the little gumdrop thing for LiDAR on many cars, or very large sensors. That's where I think a lot of the hardware issues are going to be worked out and define, like, what is an acceptable level of performance. But then very quickly, you have to really take that technology and put it into much more of a compelling form factor, much more smaller, cheaper, less power, huge amounts of activities. And I think that that's going to dominate a lot of R&D investment over the next decade to really take autonomous driving capability and put it in a hardware footprint that is really appropriate for mass market automotive. But I don't think it's going to stop there, Billy. I think that what we're also seeing, you've heard of concepts of sensor fusion and algorithms, so very quickly, and this is part of ADI's strategy, not only in automotive, but in a variety of different market segments, is what are the things that you put on top of those, of that silicon in order to really hit this challenge. One of the technologies that ADI has, for example, is enabling cooperative radar. So in other words, radar modules that can communicate with each other that are not necessarily connected physically together. That is not necessarily part of radar systems in cars today. Each radar module operates independently. But with this algorithmic approach, these radars can communicate with each other and give you superior resolution without necessarily increasing the hardware footprint of the car. So you'll see a transition to effectively radar fusion. You'll see this transition to algorithms being a much more critical piece to these systems of the future. Sensor fusion is a piece of that, and then that in turn will influence the hardware map, the hardware roadmap. Today, everybody wants to have the best camera, the best radar, the best LiDAR. With sensor fusion, you don't need that, right?
Yeah.
Sensor fusion is meant to account for all of the impairments of all of these different sensors. And that's going to start becoming much more the algorithm and how that impacts the hardware. That's really where a lot of the focus, I think, is going to go. And I think analog devices and a lot of the tech companies are going to follow that trend, right?
Yeah.
We're more than hardware now. We call it moving up the stack at analog devices, right? Yes, we're going to do the hardware and all the things associated with that challenge, size, weight, power, but that's not where it stops, right? We want to have the thing that's on top of that that really can add value to the end application.
And I guess the exciting thing for engineers is because it's constantly evolving now more than ever compared to, say, 1995, it's now thinking of what next. So how do we change? How do we update those sensors? How does the LiDAR or radar, how does that constantly change? So I think it now more than ever for these engineers, it's such an exciting time.
Definitely. Definitely. And again, at ADI, in the past, you had to be a design engineer, a traditional semiconductor design engineer. Now, there's such a diversity of things that we do here, right?
Yeah.
Our products are not solely the hardware any longer. And again, that's great for individuals that want to evolve their career at analog devices. Maybe I'll try something different. Maybe I'll become a software guy from a hardware guy. And it also allows us to really make an impact in the marketplace. And I think that my business unit has the unique advantage, Billy, that these are very difficult technical challenges, but they really are supporting such a positive societal impact, right? It's about saving lives at the end of the day, and going all the way back to how our employees really want to have a purpose and a mission in their contributions. I find that what we're doing today very much lines up with that, right? This is difficult engineering. Yes, I like that. But if we can achieve this, we can make such a positive impact on society, which is kind of a 2-for-1 when it comes to this. And so that's also a big piece of the motivation here.
Great. Okay, so to wrap up, what would you say is the one piece of advice you'd give to anyone who is ready to make that leap to that senior level leadership? Is there any one bit that really stands out to you?
Yes, it is something in which I would, I would have to say that, it's not necessarily about taking on more responsibility. It's about how you can make an impact to the business. And so I think that that's really where you have to have your forethought there. Promotions and responsibility comes after that philosophy is brought forward. And I see, you mentioned the faux pas earlier. If you put, I just want more responsibility first, a lot of times that's backwards. Start with how you can make the impact, right? Explain your vision to your management and how you can uniquely contribute to that. That is what has to come first, Billy. Because if you can chart the course and you can pave the path to, that can fulfill that vision, others will fall in behind you on that. And those responsibilities and those promotions will naturally come. But it starts from a love of what you do and a clarity about how you can contribute to the bottom line of the business, and ultimately the vision of how you can make the world a better place. And we talked about how important those social imperatives are to our organizations today. And so really, I would definitely recommend that our younger employees really think about how they want to make those contributions. And I think naturally they're going to move up through the ranks.
Brilliant. Perfect. Well, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time. We're in the UK, but for you, it's still very early in the morning over in Boston. So thank you very much for being on today. I look forward to listening to all the other stuff that's going on within the autonomous stuff at Analog. So guys, if you're still listening, we are going to be releasing our podcast over the next couple of weeks. So keep your eyes peeled. Chris, thanks again. We really appreciate you coming on. Have you enjoyed it?
Oh, it was a great time, Billy. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. Everyone, we'll speak to you very, very soon. Thank you.